Members, ladies and gentlemen, member of the public, and welcome to the meeting of the Planning and Licensing, and particularly members of the public who have joined us in person and anybody who is following the meeting on Zoom. Please, can those speaking ensure that their microphones, I don't know where this echo is coming from, are switched on for the benefit of those listening online. And to members of the public, if you're only here for one particular agenda item, please feel free to leave after that. And I would say to you, I recognise, certainly I've had an unprecedented number of approaches on this. Would ask you please, whatever your views and however strongly felt, that you listen to the debate in silence. I'll try and make it clear as we go along the procedure for that. So item number one, if we move to the agenda proper, apologies, I've actually received from Andrew Brown, Councillor Andrew Brown, who unfortunately has contracted COVID. I spoke to him this morning. He is not too unwell, I think it's fair to say, and I'm sure you would join me in wishing him a speedy recovery. So item number two then, minutes, please confirm the minutes. I saw Councillor Cross first and Councillor Oxley seconding. All those in favour, please. And abstentions, please. Thank you very much indeed. Item three, declarations of interest. Looking around, has anyone any interest to declare? Sorry.
It's 2 sets of minutes, Chair. 2 sets of minutes, 8th
Yep.
March and 15th of March.
Sorry, second meeting. We've approved them for the 8th of March, now the 15th of March. Councillor Bull opposed, Councillor Beggar seconded. All those in favour, please. How I could forget a meeting, I don't know, but thank you. And abstentions? Thank you very much. So if I could now please move to item three, declarations of interest. Are there any from anybody? Thank you. If we move on to petitions, deputations and questions, and they will be taken according to the item concerned. And for benefit of members of the public, what we will now do is that Mr. Hodgett will present the report. We will then have the speakers in the order in which they were received. The ward members will speak and the applicant and agent will speak. Sorry. Thank you very much. I'll just hope that the technical side is sorted.
Yeah, it is.
Is that better now? Yeah. Sorry? Oh, yes, yes. Testing, testing, testing. Conversation is silver, silence is golden. It's working, is it?
Yeah, it's good for you, Sean. It's good for us.
Yes, good. Yeah. Members, fellow members will be well aware of my attitude to technology. I'm not going to apologise for it, but there we are. I hope that you haven't missed anything too vital, but I will just reiterate the procedure now for what is about to happen. Mr. Hodgett will present the report. There are then 4 speakers, 5 speakers. The 2 ward members will speak after two members opposed to the application, and then the applicant and agent will speak. There is no limit on ward members' time, but the other speakers are restricted technically to 3 minutes. I've always taken the view that I will not be draconian on the precise 3 minutes while asking people to be succinct. I think it's far more important that somebody who's taken the trouble to come along should have the opportunity to present what they need to. Members will then have the opportunity to ask questions again for another 3 minutes, but my same comments apply. And as I say, ward members will not have any such restraint, but I'm sure they will be concise. So having said that, I'll hand over to Mr. Hodgett for the actual presentation of the report. Mr. Hodgett.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is for an outline application for the erection of up to 100 dwellings, which would include 30 affordable houses. And in this case, only the access is included for full approval. The overall site, which you can see here in red, is on the north side of Braunston Road, and it's virtually directly opposite the site where a recent outline planning permission was granted by this committee. So that's a closer view of the site. The site extends to 7.99 hectares in total, 3.03 hectares of which would be net residential development, which gives it a net density of around 33 dwellings per hectare. And you'll see later on the master plan, the proposal envisages 4.2 hectares of public open space and a further 0.29 hectares of attenuation area for surface water and play area. So that's a further close-up of the site itself. You can see Braunston Road in yellow at the bottom there. There are 2 mature trees in the middle of this site, and a provisional tree preservation order has now been placed on those trees to ensure that they remain protected for the future. The development didn't envisage them being removed in any event. Again, that's just a red line showing the site. You'll see that there's a small portion of land owned by the applicant in the northeast corner that's not actually included within the application site. This is the plan for the access, which is included for full approval at this stage, showing the dimensions and the visibility display and the proposed new footway on the Braunston Road frontage. And over to the right of the screen, you can see the approved access point for the land to the north of, to the south of Braunston Road, which indicates the offset between the two. So this plan, whilst it was submitted as a drainage strategy plan, a very high level drainage strategy plan, it does show the contours on the site, so you can see which way the land does fall, so that the highest point on the site is here on this western boundary, and the land falls down to the northeast in that direction, down towards the properties at the back of Warn Close here, and again it falls down towards this southeast corner towards Braunston Road in that direction. And you can see there that the 135-metre contour is indicated by the purple dashed line, below which all the proposed new housing would sit, so that it doesn't go any further up onto the high land than that line indicates. So that's the latest master plan. I think this might have changed slightly from the one that's published in the agenda, because these units here at the bottom of the site were backing onto the open space, and this little portion here of the master plan has been redesigned so that those units there would now face out onto the open space, together with the rest of the development which faces outwards all the way around. On the eastern side of the site, It's not very clear on this plan, but there's a blue line there with an easement shown either side, which is for the overhead lines, which members will recall continued across the site on the opposite side of Braunston Road. So this plan shows the main access and the main sort of spine road, and then it has secondary roads leading off and dwellings in clusters. And then you can see the two trees that have now got preservation order on there. There is a tree further up there which is indicated, but that is now dead. And you'll see that on the photograph. And it's proposed to reinstate an ancient line of a hedge in this position. And then this will become just grassed open space. There is a play area shown in this area here, which would be overlooked by these units and enclosed by the hedge. And then there's some structural planting around this western and southern edge of the site that would help soften and screen the appearance of the development as you come into town from the Braunston direction. But you'll see from photographs that views into the site from that direction are limited at the present time. These are some photographs that were submitted with the landscape visual appraisal. The top one is from Warren Crescent looking through towards the site, and you can see the proximity of the overhead lines at the back of properties there on Warren Crescent. And the bottom one is from Glebe Way. The top one there, that's from Cold Overton Road at the junction with Mendip Road. And I've got another photograph that I took just further down Mendip Road that you'll see in a minute. The bottom one there is from west to southwest of Glebe Farm, which I think is at the top of Cold Overton Road. This shot is from Pentland Court. And again, you see the site in the background, one of those preserved trees. And the bottom one from Hilltop Drive, which is on the opposite side of Cold Overton Road. So the top view here is on Braunston Road, looking down towards the site, which is to the left behind the trees and the hedge line. And the site that was recently approved is on the right-hand side there, down at the bottom. Again, the picture at the bottom is from the other side of Braunston Road, looking down to the site, which shows how reasonably well screened that side of the site is. And again, this final picture is from further up Cold Overton Road, which looks across, and you can just make out those two trees that I referred to on the site here, beyond which, nearer to the camera, there would be no development. That would be part of the open space. So this is a photograph just inside the site on Braunston Road, looking up Braunston Road towards Braunston to the west. And you can see the land starts to slope up there to the right-hand side. This one's looking a bit further to the right, which the view is indicated by the arrow on the plan at the bottom. So we're now looking up towards the highest point of the site over there. You can see the nearer pylon. And then this swings a bit further to the right, looking down the boundary of the site, which is here. And this looks across an area of open space that sits in front of Hanbury Close, just behind the Braunston Road frontage. And that's a view actually up Braunston Road itself in front of the site, and then in the opposite direction down towards town. So you can see that there is a reasonably straight section of road there with a reasonably wide verge. So there's really no issue with getting an access in there with adequate visibility. This photograph is taken from a field just off Cold Overton Road, almost opposite Hilltop. You can see the backs of the properties there on the left. I think that's the back of properties on Mendip. But the actual application site is this field beyond. So you can see this land slopes down, and this is where the water course on the northern end of the site is, through where these trees and hedges run. And then the application site is here. And again, you can see the two trees on site, and the highest point is over there. So the land comes up to a ridge at this point and then disappears back down towards Braunston Road in the distance. This is that other shot from just a little further down Mendip Way. And again, you can see one of the preserved trees there, and all the new development would be this side of the tree. This is from a garage court at the bottom of Hudson Close. Again, the arrow here indicates the direction. So that previous photograph was taken from the top of that field there. That hedge at the top is the boundary hedge to Cold Overton Road. This is the bottom end of the site, which is not actually within the red line in this corner. And again, the watercourse runs through here where surface water will be discharged. This again is looking further to the right from the previous view. There's the tree that's now dead at the bottom, and that's one of the now preserved trees. And there you can see even further around to the left with the two trees in the middle of the site. Again, the development would be limited to this side of those trees. Shot between two properties in Hudson Close, showing the proximity of the overhead lines at the back of those properties at the moment. As the report points out, the new development would be slightly further away from the overhead lines than the existing properties appear to be. And that's looking straight up Hudson Close in a southerly direction. So in terms of the main issues, first one, obviously the major one is the policy situation. The site is outside the planned limits of development, but it does adjoin the planned limits of development where it forms the edge of Oakham at the moment. Members are now fully aware of the situation with regard to the local plan and the availability of a 5-year housing land supply that is required by government guidance in the National Planning Policy Framework. Because we don't have that up-to-date 5-year housing land supply, paragraph 11D is engaged, where the presumption in favour of sustainable development kicks in, and that is a significant material consideration for you to take into account. And as members have heard in previous meetings, you need to consider all the other policies to see if any harm caused by the development would outweigh the presumption in favour that's outlined in paragraph 11D. In this case, the scheme has not been demonstrated to cause harm to any areas or assets of particular importance, and there are no adverse impacts that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, which is the wording that is actually taken from the framework itself. You'll see from the report that the Oakham and Barleythorpe neighbourhood plan is awaiting its referendum, but it doesn't allocate any sites for development anyway. So in that case, paragraph 11D, even if you lend any weight to that draft neighbourhood plan, paragraph 11D is still engaged. In terms of the design and layout, the layout, as I pointed out earlier, has been amended slightly just to improve the relationship between dwellings and the open space so that they don't back onto that area. I think the master plan, the layout on the master plan otherwise indicates that a scheme that would meet good practice in terms of layout and design would be possible at reserve matters stage. In terms of the drainage, there's been a lot of concern about surface water drainage on and from this site, and members will recall similar concerns were expressed regarding the land to the south of Braunston Road. And the flood risk strategy that was approved there was demonstrated to actually reduce the risk of flooding to the bungalows on the south side of Braunston Road. Now this plan at the bottom of the screen here, I think has been sent to members indicating that there is a flood risk on the site. I must stress that this isn't flood risk from a watercourse. This flood risk indicated on the middle of the site here down at the bottom, I'm sorry it's so small, that is a flood risk from effectively from heavy rain, and I think that's understandable when you see the slope of the site that leads down to that part of the site, and then a slight flood risk as well from the watercourse at the northern end, but again you saw how the levels dropped down to that. So the drainage scheme would outlet to the watercourse at the northern end of the site and the ditch on Braunston Road at the southern end at a rate equivalent to Greenfield, or in fact lower than Greenfield would normally be assessed. It would be limited to 4.3 litres per second, which is outlined in condition 14 on your agenda. The normal runoff rate, I think, would be 5 litres per second from Greenfield. So as the slide points out there, the detailed surface water drainage scheme would be submitted later as part of the reserve matters approval, but the The strategy that's been submitted is acceptable to Anglian Water, the Environment Agency, and the lead local flood authority. And there's a quote there from the flood risk assessment extract. So again, this is from the flood risk assessment, which shows that the mean annual flood flow would be 4.3 litres per second, and that's what is proposed to be limited in terms of the detailed scheme. The assessment of the land showed that the land is not particularly good for infiltration into the ground, but there are surface water sewers in the area, but it's not proposed to connect to any of those. So greenfield runoff rates, as I said, would be utilised at a low level into the existing watercourses. And then this plan is the plan showing the flood risk strategy, so that you can see that surface water would drain, and it will be intercepted where it runs down the hill. It will be intercepted and go into an attenuation basin here at the bottom of the site, and another one at the northern end of the site here, because you could see the land falls in both directions. And there will then be a hydro break that limits at this end. It says it will be limited to 4.2 litres per second into that watercourse that runs in an easterly direction through the existing development. The note here does say that it would be limited to 5.4 litres per second here, but that would actually be less than that, and that's what the condition would require for the details to show. And as the note at the bottom points out there, these are exactly the same principles as you considered to be acceptable for the site on the opposite side of the road. Highway safety, the new access in that position is acceptable in principle. The visibility is acceptable. The precise internal layout will be for later approval. And the local roads, despite local fears of capacity on the roads, then they're not actually at capacity at this point in time, such that you could use that as a reason for refusal. The technical evidence shows that this is the case. In terms of ecology, you'll see the report points out that biodiversity net gain far exceeds the requirements of the Environment Act, which will be coming to force next year. There's an increase in 171% habitat units and 221% in hedgerow units. In terms of local infrastructure, members are aware that the community infrastructure levy is collected from each dwelling to go towards those facilities. So there's no reason why you should refuse permission based on those particular issues. In terms of residential amenity, I think it's understandable that there's been concerns from local residents, particularly those that overlook this site. But members are aware that nobody has a right to a view over third-party land. And the layout and the easement for the overhead lines means that the separation distance between the new development and the existing will mean that the scheme would meet the standards in the newly adopted design guide for housing layout, and that they would actually far exceed the requirements in that document. Now, the overall site, the 7.9 hectares, was assessed as part of the local plan for a potential housing site to be allocated. And that was, as I say, that related to the whole site, including the higher part, and was for 148 units. That came out with a negative result because of the landscape impact. This scheme, clearly for a lower number, has addressed that particular issue. And the landscape impact has been now deemed to be acceptable. And you'll see from the report that we employed the same architect that advised the local plan process to have a look at this particular scheme in detail. And his view was that, that the scheme has addressed the issue that he set out in that strategic assessment earlier on. and that keeping the dwellings at lower levels will mean that there won't be a major impact on landscape on the edge of the town. And his report, I think, is appended to the main report. So there would be a 30% policy requirement for affordable housing, which the applicant has agreed to provide, which will be secured through a legal agreement. So in conclusion, this is a sustainable site. It's on the edge of the most sustainable settlement in the county, where Oakham and Uppingham are the focus for new development. You considered the site opposite to be sustainable, and this one really is no different. Because of the 5-year housing land supply, with the local plan being withdrawn, the MPPF Para 11D is engaged, where the presumption is in favour of sustainable development. And in the absence of any major technical or other reasons for refusal, the application is recommended for approval, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Huddett. So if I could ask Sammy Munton to come forward to the table. Thank you very much indeed.
Want to? Yeah.
Yes, when you're ready, and
Sorry,
you have your generous 3 minutes.
Okay, so I'd like to start by reminding you that this proposal did receive 246 objections and only had 3 supporting comments. In January 2022, the proposal for Ketton was rejected, principally on lack of infrastructure in Rutland. Consider that we now have 470 homes proposed, 190 homes approved, 54 already being built. That's 1,114 new houses. If you then include houses already built or being built for over 55s, then that's 1,352 new homes in Oakham. The significant increase in the town's population has been coupled with no comparable investment in public services. Primary care is stretched beyond repair. Oakham Medical Practice, an example, was designed to cope with 12,000 patients. It currently has a patient list of 15,567. A planning agreement freedom of information request confirmed that the surgery is not fit for purpose. Residents' lives are at risk with dangerously long waits for ambulances and GP appointments. There is no out-of-hours health service, no swimming pool, school places are under pressure, we have no cinema and a failing high street. We do agree that Oakham could be a sustainable location for development, but not until this is resolved. The traffic reports provided for this proposal are unreliable. They're based on 2011 census data with a lower population in Oakham and lower average car ownership. The baseline traffic survey was carried out in June 2021 during a work from home if you can lockdown, so again, unreliable. New traffic reports are needed before this proposal should even be considered. The build-up of traffic in peak time coming from the northwest of the town can regularly be seen stretching to all perimeters. This is a regular daily occurrence and something we have evidenced in our own surveys. There is no access to the bypass as the build-up is too large. With one development already approved on Braunston Road for 62 homes and 44 on Brook Road, any further increase in traffic on this side of town is unsustainable without strategic scale mitigation, and this development should be rejected on this basis alone. Surface water flood risk is another major concern for the location, both for new properties and regarding the impact of the development on existing properties. The development cannot be allowed to increase flood risk, and the diagram in our response document that we did send to you all shows a natural stream water source running down the hill on the north side of the site, which falls under high risk of flooding bracket, as identified by an independent consultant. It appears that this application has come to committee too soon, and we ask that you please don't grant permission until the applicant can prove to the satisfaction of all consultees that the development will not cause significant and lasting adverse effects to drainage and traffic. Woolfox Garden Village have a plan to provide 7,500 new homes, including those council built, with employment, new schools, recreational facilities, transports, parks and open spaces. It's so close to the A1 with its own facilities, and it has to be the answer to providing new homes in Rutland in line with the 5-year housing supply, without destroying a town that already can't cope. Even without Woolfox, the 5-year supply can be met through other more sustainable developments in Oakham, such as current applications at Ashwell Road and Barleythorpe. If it really is essential to build in Oakham, then these are the places to do so, not in this unsuitable location. To conclude, building on this site would have severe impact on traffic, an unacceptable effect on Oakham's landscape, a negative impact on local services, bring high flood risk, and is in conflict with what was the local plan. The site has for a long period of time been considered unsuitable for development by Rutland County Council. The site south of Braunston Road was, in my opinion, wrongly agreed, but done so on the basis that it was in the local plan. Therefore, the same rule should apply and this site should be declined simply because it was not. That's me.
Thank you very much. If you would like. I would just say, I recognise that feelings are running very high. I did in the echo chamber at the beginning of the meeting, did say to you, please, if you would respect the speakers, whatever their opinions, and we really go in silence. So if I got a little temporary deafness to that applause, I do apologise. So therefore, members, if you've got any questions for Sammy Munton, if you would indicate now. Councillor McCartney.
Thanks, Chairman. Just to say well done on a fantastic presentation. That was very well received. We don't very often get such comprehensive pieces.
Anyone else? Any other member? In that case, please join us. Thank you. And I'll ask Councillor Jane Ellis from Braunston Parish Council.
Thank you. Good evening. One of the key arguments for approving this site seems to be that Rutland is short of its 5-year housing supply. The latest publicly available information suggests that there's a housing supply of 3.5 years available. However, having looked at the information available, we do not actually believe that there is a shortage of housing in the county, and that it is not the point in time to be allowing speculative development on greenfield sites, for many of the reasons that have just been outlined. Rutland's current housing delivery test measurement is 189%. The application of presumption in favour of sustainability cannot apply because Rutland has not fallen below 75% delivery against target. Rutland is not subject to any action planning regarding delivery of housing, and it doesn't have an increased buffer. The reported housing supply data admits the Bellway houses on Braunston Road, the 62 to the south of the road. Bellway confirmed this morning that there will be completions on that site in the summer of 2023, with show homes opening next spring. There is no mention of Bellway in that latest report on housing supply. Significant amounts of older people's housing do not appear to have been included in the supply calculations. There is no mention of any joint planning arrangement with South Kesteven. The 272 surplus completions identified in that last report would normally be rolled over to offset future housing requirements. They have not been rolled over on the basis that the local plan is out of date. That cannot be right. With an update expected in April, we feel it may be beneficial for the Planning and Licensing Committee to undertake a thorough review of the 5-year housing supply data to assure its integrity. Major material planning considerations are being played down. Assessment of the site does appear to have a lack of rigour. For example, the scope of the highways report is very limited and does not look at the impact across Oakham and the surrounding county. And in Braunston, we are particularly concerned about the increase on traffic through the village. The adopted local plan, despite being withdrawn in 2021, still carries weight, as was confirmed by the legal advice that the council received regarding the Braunston Road South development. Therefore, an argument that the presumption in favour of sustainability applies because there is no local plan appears to be questionable. The Local Government Planning Advisory Service has published a paper in recent years entitled Sustainable Decision Making Without a Local Plan. It contains case studies where appeals by developers have been unsuccessful in cases where there is no local plan or a 5-year housing supply. Significant material planning considerations and objections from the local community are being underreported, glossed over and ignored, and this is extremely worrying. Algorithms and formula can never be a substitute for local knowledge and sensible decision-making by councils and communities who know their areas best. In Rutland, appropriately scaled development of brownfield sites, for example, at St George's Barracks or Woolfox, should be a primary focus. And we would urge you to reject this application and undertake a review of the 5-year housing supply data. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, any questions for? I would ask you, do you feel that members of this committee have been made sufficiently aware of the figures that you have been giving us this evening?
Well, if they look at the land supply and developable housing land supply report that was produced, I think, last September, the figures for how the housing is calculated are all in there, but there do seem to be some glaring omissions, or for whatever reason, figures are not being taken forward into the calculation of housing supply. The county does appear to have a 3.5-year housing supply, and its housing delivery test measurement is calculated every year using the previous 3 financial years to arrive at the percentage delivered. So in a sense, the county's done very well. And if we can't count that over performance of targets, then you're going to be in a position that the county is going to be overdeveloped, and that good delivery, I mean, there are many local authorities across the country who are performing extremely badly on their housing targets. Some have had housing targets frozen, and some are basically, again, under very close supervision because they've fallen below the 75%. But if we can't count 272 houses that have already been developed in excess of target, there is something, I think, very drastically wrong.
Thank you very much. Any other members? Right, thank you. And I've now got the 2 ward members. I'm not sure who's coming in first. Councillor Toslem, thank you.
Good evening. I've asked to read a statement tonight as I have had many emails and other correspondence from members of the public regarding their concerns for this development. I am summarising these, and I will be going into some more detail with regards to the flooding and traffic implications. It is worth noting that I have not received a single email of support for the proposed development. The impact on Locum's landscape. This site has for a long period been considered unsuitable for development by Rutland County Council, referring to past reports. That Rutland County Council Landscape Sensitivity and Capacity Study 2010 and the site appraisals document for the Rutland Local Plan Review in 2017. Development here on a prominent hillside would have a major detrimental impact on the setting of Oakham. Impact on local services. This proposed development adds to the ongoing development in Oakham, putting pressure on infrastructure. Primary care is particularly stretched in Oakham, with a reported lack of capacity, and I would like to refer here to the recent Primary Care Task and Finish Group and their findings. Any increase in the town's population must include comparable investment to infrastructure. Ecology. This is a greenfield site with mature oak trees and hedgerows. Development would bring hard surfaces and light pollution and lessen the value of these habitats and will have a negative impact on local wildlife. Major effects on existing properties. The topography of this site and the restrictions due to the overhead power lines will mean that the housing will have to be located up the slope. This will result in overlooking to the existing houses bordering its eastern edge and cause a significant loss of privacy and light. Flood risk. Part of the site is at a high risk of flooding and unsuitable for development. The landscaping would increase the runoff from the site and increase the flood risk to existing properties on Braunston Road and Grampian Way. The National Planning Policy Framework states that inappropriate development in areas of flooding should be avoided by directing development away from areas of highest risk. Such a risk does exist for part of this site, as shown in the image which has been circulated to committee members and presented earlier this evening. It is figure 3 in the flood risk assessment supplied by Jeekins Weir. There is a surface water flow route across the southern end of the site with areas at high risk of flooding, flood risk assessment 6.9. At the east of this site, the flow route is associated with flooding of properties. There is another surface water flow route just to the north of the site, which also has a high risk of flooding associated with it. The flow route at the southern end of the site intersects several proposed properties, and section 9.13 states, the SFRA indicates that there is a low risk indicative drainage pathway across the site. This drainage pathway is high risk in part rather than low risk. It appears that as a result, surface water flows are considered in terms of those generated by the development and not those impacting the development. The properties within the flow route must be at high risk of impact from surface water flooding, especially considering the effects of climate change. Off-site, there are concerns that the surface water flows from the field will be increased by landscaping, then concentrated and routed via attenuation ponds into the watercourses at either end of the field. Both watercourses already cause flooding, of which a video was captured on the 16th of March 2022 and shared on social media on April the 8th, 2022. It was circulated to all councillors on the 15th of April 2022. And should the attenuation ponds reach capacity, that flooding would be worsened by a new development. Impact on traffic. The site appraisals document for the Rutland Local Plan Review in 2017, under the category Impact on the Wider Road Network, gave the field a red rating. On its own, impact on the already significant congestion on the west side of Oakham is likely to require moderate mitigation. There is also flood risk. Cumulative development, however, on this side of Oakham will significantly increase traffic congestion and require strategic scale mitigation. Cumulative development is the situation faced on the west side of Oakham, with developments of 62 properties on the south side of Braunston Road and 40 properties on the former allotments at Brook Road, immediately east of the Brook Road level crossing, which has already been granted planning permission. Data from the transport assessment shows approximately 4 trains per hour on the 1st of July 2021 at the Barleythorpe Road level crossing, with an average closure time of 3 minutes. The level crossing is therefore closed for approximately 12 minutes in every hour. The Brook Road level crossing survey was carried out in 2017. The average closure time here was 5 minutes, giving an approximate closure time of 20 minutes in every hour. The time for the resulting queues at each level crossing to clear during rush hour is not reported. This data would reflect the real impact of the level crossings on traffic levels and should be provided to properly inform this planning application. A Network Rail route study, which was taken from a document linked to the Brook Road allotment site, indicates that the number of freight trains using this section of railway is set to increase. It predicts a total of 3 freight trains per hour each way in 2023 and 4 freight trains per hour each way in 2043. This is in addition to 2 passenger trains movements per hour, currently rising to 4 passenger train movements per hour at peak times. 8 to 10 train movements per hour by 2023 would result in a 24 to 30 minutes of closure at Barleythorpe Road and 40 to 50 minutes of closure at Brook Road. This would imply the road junctions in question are already operating beyond their capacity during and after closures of the level crossings during rush hour. The impact of the increase in traffic in this area should be considered severe and unsustainable because of this, and it should consider that one development has already been approved. Rutland County Council Highways commissioned external consultants, AECOM, to assess the original transport assessment and travel plan provided with the application. Their review identified a number of legitimate concerns. The consultant employed by the developer, RPS, have responded to this. There seems to be no review of RPS's response, either by ACOM or by Rutland County Council Highways. No decision should be made until the transport assessment has been thoroughly reviewed and critiqued. The findings of a report commissioned for and provided by the developer should not be taken as read. Distribution of the traffic flows were also based on a 2011 journey to work census data, which could be considered out of date as they are 10 years old, more so by the time the development would be complete. The baseline traffic flows used in the report were carried out in June 2021, when the country was still emerging from a lockdown, at a time when traffic was considerably reduced. A new assessment must be carried out in light of these points. In conclusion, there are a number of factual and legitimate concerns surrounding the development, and it would be reasonable to address the points above before the development can be properly considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Toseland. Members, any questions? Councillor Oxley.
Thank you, Leo. Yes, very succinct. You mentioned evidence of flooding to local properties already earlier on in your presentation. Whereabouts did that flooding take place?
Let me just go back in my... I think that is one this has been in the reports that already exist and within the videos and pictures shared within the wider public and sent to councillors.
So was it to the left or was it to the top of the field or the bottom of the field? Was it closest to the Braunston Road or closest to the river?
Braunston Road, sorry. I wouldn't be able to answer that without going into the document and reading it at the time, sorry.
Other members? Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Councillor Toseland. You've mentioned the rail crossing, the increase in traffic, and you're quite right. In the future, we're looking towards 40 minutes of closure on those crossings. That's bad enough, but I may have misheard, but I don't think you then mentioned the cumulative effect of those closures upon the Melton Road and the Cold Overton Road junction, where people are trying to access the town, and sometimes they are held up that long. The crossing gates go down yet again before the traffic has exited Cold Overton Road, which of course would be the feeder for this proposed development. Am I correct that you didn't actually mention the cumulative effect?
You are correct and you are right. I use these roads regularly myself.
Thank you very much indeed. That just reconfirms that my hearing isn't as bad as my wife makes out. Thank you.
Any other members? Thank you very much, Councillor Toseland. Councillor Ainsley.
Good evening. The site at Braunston Road North is outside the plan limits for development. For Locum is considered a greenfield site and was not included in the now withdrawn local plan. The application has met with stiff opposition from residents, of which 246 have raised formal complaints. Significant and indeed valid and vocal local opposition. Other speakers will have addressed the many objections, but I intend to focus on two primary objections and wish to cite the refusal of planning application 2021/1452/MAO at Kettering. Like Ketton, the infrastructure in Oakham is under considerable strain, with 360 homes proposed and 190 homes approved. A strong case can be made that the application for development is unsustainable. As I'm sure you're all aware, the revised National Planning Policy Framework, July 2021, sets out government planning policies for England and how these are expected to be applied. In particular, NPPF Para 94, promoting healthy and safe community, states that it is important that a sufficient choice of school places is available to meet the needs of existing and new communities. On the 3rd of March, at the meeting of the Schools Forum, the School Capacity Survey 2021 was presented. The survey states that Oakham Primary Cluster is at 91% capacity, and yet when considering our 2 colleges for the year 22-23, Catmose is at 101% capacity and Casterton is at 110%. NPPF Para 8, Achieving Sustainable Development, a social role, I paraphrase slightly, but to support strong, vibrant health communities that reflects current and future needs and support communities, health, social and cultural well-being. And it specifically includes GP practices. As has been mentioned before, the final report of the Primary Task and Finish Group, which surveyed Rutland residents, surveyed just over 900 patients in total, of which 536 commented on how easy it was to make an appointment at the Oakham local practice. 72% said it was not easy, and a further 88% received an engagement tone when calling. The practice is wilting under the strain, which comes as no surprise, as the practice was established with a capacity of 12,000 and currently has more than 15,500 registered patients, close to 30% over original planned capacity. In conclusion, given the number of homes proposed, with inevitably more on the horizon, Oakham schools and our local GP services are already under serious strain, and in all likelihood will be unable to cope with the number of additional residents. I therefore recommend to the committee that this planning application be refused on the grounds that the application does not currently satisfy Paras 8 and 94 of the NPPF and would not therefore constitute sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ainsley. Members, any questions for Councillor Ainsley? Councillor Gordon Brown.
Chairman, just like to ask Councillor Ainsley, in respect to the medical centre, who's responsible for actually resolving the problem of capacity and spending the money on it?
It wouldn't necessarily be the county council, but I do believe that there is the CCG is the people that clinical commissioning group are actually directly responsible. We have addressed this in the plan, but essentially what we're talking about here is a development, isn't it? That actually can only increase the amount of stresses and strains by the Oakham medical practice. So CCG is the answer to your question.
Chairman, just supplementary. You also mentioned the secondary schools.
I did.
And the capacity restraints there. You mentioned Casterton at 110%. The number of out-of-county children going to that particular school?
I don't have that figure to hand. I think what the fact remains that there are 110% capacity, and we're increasing the number of pupils that are going to be attending those establishments. So,
if I suggested a figure of over 60% coming from out-of-county, would you be surprised?
Not given the quality of education from Rutland.
Similar situation at Uppingham, if I'm not mistaken, Councillor Oxley. It's certainly in excess of 50% come from out of county to Uppingham Community College.
That wouldn't surprise me. That wouldn't surprise me.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Ainsley, thank you very much indeed. In your opinion, would you say that ultimately councillors are responsible for the well-being, the health and the education for the residents of Rutland?
Simply put, yes.
Thank you.
Any other members? Thank you very much, Councillor Ainsley. In that case, I will ask Mr. Gore and Mr. Weir to come forward on behalf of the applicant. I gather you're doing a double act, so I'll leave it to you to organise that. Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Alistair Weir and I am MD of Jeekins Weir. I felt it important that I come to speak to the committee this evening and to assure you of my commitment to Oakham. I have grown up and still live in Oakham, and my family have lived here for 50 years. Oakham is very important to me, and I want to assure members that I will make sure our proposals deliver much needed new homes that both Jeekins Weir and Oakham residents can be proud of, and that will enhance the town. We did so at our Spinney Hill development on Uppingham Road, and I see this site, which is already in our ownership, as being a great opportunity to provide a similar development that will, in the words of your own landscape consultant, improve the approach into Oakham from the west. I want to assure members that in delivering this proposed development, we will again provide high quality, sustainable and well-designed houses for the town and its residents. An RP is lined up to deliver the affordable housing and construction can start within the year. I remain committed to Oakham and I will ensure that the houses we build will meet our shared objectives. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now, I fully understand that with any development comes a level of concern from local community, regardless of size and where it's located. And I understand that makes the jobs of planning committees and officers very difficult at times. But what we have here is a very simple advice from central government, and it is that where there is an identified 5-year housing land supply shortfall, the test for any housing related planning application should be that permission ought to be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So that's the test here, what's known as the tilted balance. And I'm sure we can all agree here that whether it's looking backwards at the previous local plan or looking forwards at the emerging local plan, that Oakham is the most sustainable location for growth within the county and should, and very likely will be, the focus for the majority of the county's new housing development going forward. And this site is located immediately adjacent to the planned limits to development. There have been no technical objections raised by any statutory consultees in respect to this site. Indeed, as you've already heard, the same landscape consultant who advised on the local plan site assessment work was reconsulted on the proposed development. And not only did he conclude that the proposals would not represent significant adverse landscape and visual impact, but he concluded that the proposals would actually represent visual improvement to the existing western approach into Oakham. On balance, it's clear that in the context of the tilted balance, the presumption in favour, the impacts of this development certainly do not significantly demonstrably outweigh the benefits. In fact, this is exactly the type of site that the tilted balance, the presumption in favour, is aimed at releasing for development. A sustainable one on the edge of the most sustainable settlement in the county, and one without any technical objections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, got Councillor Oxley, was an indication there, and then Councillor Brown. So Councillor Oxley, I saw first. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, a question with regards to the difference between the two sites, the Uppingham Road site and this site we're looking at this evening. And would you agree that the Uppingham Road site, as far as access into the town, is much easier, given the fact that you don't have to cross the railway to get into the centre of the town, and it's a lot closer to the town centre. So whereas this site, I would suggest, is actually on a road which does go into a bottleneck at the far end of the town, where it joins the Cold Overton Road. So the difference between the Uppingham Road and development and this development is completely different as far as sustainability. Would you agree that was the case?
You can do this.
Yeah. No, I think our view and the views of the planning officer are that this is a sustainable site and that there are a number of amenities and services that are comfortably within walking distance. For instance, the co-op on Braunston Road is half a mile away, which is around a 9 minutes walk. The primary school is around half a mile away, which again, 9 minute walk. There's a corner shop and post office, which is around 0.3 of a mile away. And then there's a bus stop around 230 metres from the site, which provides an hourly service throughout Oakham, including to the train station, and which in itself is only 1.3 kilometres away, and is the Manual for Streets document, which is a highways consultant Bible, I suppose, indicates that walking distances within 800 metres are generally very acceptable and will be taken up, and walking distances within 2 kilometres can provide often alternatives to car uses. So I think we feel that site is in a sustainable location.
Briefly, yes.
Very, very briefly. And you're confident that what you are planning to put in to stop flooding will actually achieve that, and there won't be any flooding impacting on the properties you're planning on building?
Absolutely. I mean, the test with any development, as far as flood risk is concerned, is nil detriment. We cannot cause a flood risk and it be acceptable. So the test is nil detriment. So the surface water that comes off that site will drain as greenfield runoff rates. And as you've heard earlier on, there'll actually be a slight improvement on that. So yes, we're confident that there will be no detrimental impact on flooding as a result of our development.
Councillor Paul Brown.
Yes. According to your the flooding risk and drainage assessment report by RPS of the 27th of August, which you base your application on, you consulted the development control highway engineer, whose advice was twofold. Firstly, it suggested that you would do an the outfall of the proposed whole run be CCTV'd to show if it was holding sufficient capacity, and that was on the whole run of the sewers, the surface water drain. I apologise. And then a full, in respect to the north, it said a full risk assessment of the stream to the north, as it runs through lots of residential areas, and therefore we need to ensure that it is not a flood risk. And that was the questions put to you, put by the council's officer. I don't see any reports following that those were tested out. Can you enlighten us?
There's a condition, if this application was to be approved, there's a condition that requires a detailed drainage strategy to be carried out. So that level of detail would be necessary to go into that level of detail when carrying out that detailed drainage assessment and meeting that condition. I mean, if it's a capacity issue or if it's blockage issue, then those things could be addressed through action. It's not a principle of use of the land issue. So our view is that it would be picked up through the detailed drainage strategy that we're obligated to do.
So are you saying if there were infrastructure needed to the Braunston Road as it goes down to the main drains to support any overflow, that would be attended to by your client?
It would have to be. Throughout the application, we've had to engage with, as you know, the utility provider, the Environment Agency, and the lead local flood authority, and none of those parties have raised an objection with the principle of development. But as I said, there's a condition that requires further work. So if the conclusion of that further work was that increasing capacity for the infrastructure was required, and that's what would have to be provided.
Okay. I raise the point really because the whole of that report that you have submitted, based on two reports themselves, one from the Environment Agency, which somehow says we have no records of flooding in this area. The Rutland County Council SFRA report of May 2009 again says it's outside known flooding area. A risk is 1 in 1,000 years. I think the locals have already proved that there is a considerable number of occasions it's happened in the last few years. And I know from the paperwork and the objections that have been submitted here that it's a very keen thing that they want to make sure that it's going to be addressed. And so I leave it there.
Other members? Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Weir, thank you very much indeed for your reassuring words. Much appreciated. I'm sorry, I didn't get the name of your associate because I'm afraid I must have gone deaf again.
Sorry, Andrew Gore from Marin's
Mr.
Planning.
Gore. Well, now, Mr. Gore, you were talking about central government and what they say. Central government are not residents of Rutland, as Mr. Weir is. You talk about sustainability. Now, what will you actually be doing to alleviate the problem of traffic trying to get across the railway crossings that we have in Oakham?
I mean, the things that we can do are set out with, we've had to do a travel plan, which is part of the planning application submission. So there's a travel plan in there, and the aim of that is to encourage sustainable transport movement. So the aim is to encourage walking and cycling and public transport as opposed to car journeys. In terms of what we can actually do to stop people from getting in cars, there's not a great deal else we can do. The MPPF is clear that, I mean, I talked earlier on, I talked about drainage and I said nil detriment is the test. So we can't have any detriment. Clearly with highways, that's not the case. Any new development will have an impact on the transport network. It will put new cars onto the transport network. So the government have been quite clear that to refuse development on the grounds of highway impact, the impact has to be severe. That's the test. Has to be severe. It can't be some impact or some adverse impact. It has to be severe to warrant refusal. So there's quite a high bar in terms of traffic impact. But yeah, in terms of what we could actually do, all we can do is encourage sustainable transport journeys.
Well, Mr. Gore, thank you very much indeed. I'm very, very pleased you're capable of creating miracles, because from my experience, members of the public, no matter how well-wishing they are towards our environment, will still have between 2 and 3 cars per household and will want to drive wherever they wish to go. You mentioned flooding there, and people living on that side of Oakham are well aware of the flooding, and some of it very, very serious flooding down near the junction of West Road and Cold Overton Road junction there. And that's very, very bad indeed. I myself have seen the flooding that comes down that field and floods straight into the housing just below it. And I'm afraid I cannot.
Your question, Mr. Cross.
Oh, God. Mr. Chair, good. I quite forgot where I was.
I think we were all in that situation, yes. A question.
Mr. Gore, in your honest opinion, do you really think that people are going to walk and cycle into Oakham? And Mr. Gore, do you really think you will prevent future flooding in Oakham? Two questions, Mr. Chairman.
In respect to the first question, you know, I live in the same world as you do, and I know people's habits. We work in a planning system that.
Mr. Gore, I'm sorry.
Mr. Cross, let Mr. Councillor Cross.
I wanted a straight answer to the questions. You asked me to ask questions and ask questions. I just really want a straight answer. I don't want to go into a diatribe.
Mr. Gore is attempting to answer it, so let him answer.
All I was going to say is we work in a planning system that says to us as the developer, here's what you have to do to encourage sustainable transport movements, car, cycle, public transport. We can do those things, but I agree with you. You can't change behaviour wholesale until people start banning car parking spaces on developments or things like that. Then there will still be ultimately the end user's choice.
Drainage.
Thank you very much.
Drainage. Drainage. Question.
Drainage question.
Just sorry, just say that again.
The flooding problem down in Oakham.
I mean, again, the test that we have to meet as a developer is to have no additional impact. If as part of the investigation work that we need to do to the system, as part of that condition, there are things that can be done that will improve the drainage, then of course they will be identified and they could quite feasibly be done. But yes, there's the nil detriment is our test, and that's what we've done.
I think we're getting to.
It's a very simple one. This is quite a serious one. With the extra developments that we are seeing in Oakham, what worries me is the capacity of our sewage works. Is the capacity of our sewage works. Have Anglian Water sufficient capabilities for all of this extra development that is going on in Oakham? And that is an exceedingly serious question. And what was the answer from Anglian Water?
Put simply, the answer, the response from Anglian Water was that the system, the current system, can meet the additional demands placed on it from this development with any necessary improvements to the infrastructure. So if there are any improvements that are required as part of the works that we're going to carry out, then they can be met, they can be dealt with as part of our drainage, well, the works that we have to carry out to connect to the sewer. So, but the response we've had back from them is in principle, yes, that there's no objections essentially.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gore.
Mr. Cross, I've just been advised by the officer that paragraph 63 in the report also addresses your question.
Mr. Chairman.
That's
I understand what is in the report. However, I do not trust Anglian Water. I wanted some reassurance from Mr. Gore that they were telling the truth.
Councillor Cross, that I think is beyond the scope of the applicant to answer for an authority, but we take your point. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, gentlemen. Oh, sorry, Mr. Dale, Councillor Dale.
Two questions really. Sustainability. We've got a post office with hardly anything in it in Glebe Way. We've got a very small cooperative down the road. People buying these houses, I don't think will be going shopping there. They'll either be going with the far end of the town to the Land's End Way, or they'll be going over the railway crossing to Tesco's or the co-op. Regarding to schools, because you live next door to a primary school, doesn't guarantee you a spot in that primary school. So I'm not sure that sustainability is quite as firm as we would hope it would be. The second question is affordability. Affordability on houses. With the climate as it is, with the building materials going up and that, how confident are you that you will be able to deliver affordable houses, and not in inverted commas, as a lot of developers do? They say they're affordable, and when they're built, they're not affordable. You know, our youngsters are desperate to get on the housing market, and with, as I say, with the materials and everything else, all the costs going up, how affordable do you think your houses will be?
Just in respect to the sustainability point, the first point, this is a site on the edge of Oakham. It's, as you know, Oakham's the top of the settlement hierarchy in terms of focusing new development. So, and I've talked about the post office and the co-op, but the reality is that there's a lot more services and amenities within walking distance to this site. That they were just a few, to name a few. So again, we believe it is a sustainable site. The point you made about the primary school, again, the obligation on us as developers is to pay the financial, the SIL charges that are intended to then be spent on creating capacity in the primary school or the schooling system generally. We can't force that hand. We can only, the obligation for us is to provide those contributions, and that's what we've done, or we will do, through SIL. And then again, affordability, I mean, that's very clearly set out. MPPF tells us exactly what an affordable house is. A proportion of them will be social rent, and they have to be transferred to registered social landlord, and they will be let people on the register. So, and then I suppose the other portion of affordable housing would be, say, shared ownership, which again, there's things in place to ensure that they remain affordable. It's not in our gift necessarily to say, well, that's what the price is going to be. Is there anything else to add to that on the affordability?
No, I mean, I think when it comes to the affordability of the houses, the houses will be set at the market value, and any additional increase in the cost of the house will reduce the residual land value. So I don't think there's any change in the market value of the houses. It's just the land value that shifts. And as I say, the house, as Andy said, there are 30 affordable homes going to be on the site now. That basically means that we build 30 affordable homes at costs and give them to a housing association to then disperse as they see fit.
Mr. Chairman, just on that, I appreciate that, but the costs of building the houses are increasing more have increased more this last 2 years than they have for the last 10 years, probably. Do you think they will still be affordable?
Well, I know only too well that material costs are going up. But as I say, you know, the houses will sell at the market value, and the market value it will remain constant, or not constant. It won't go up by the same rate as the material price increases have gone up. What will happen is that the residual value of the land will decrease, and so that's how it'll work.
Thank you very much, and thank you, gentlemen. after that now retired to the backbenches. Members, I'm going to take an unusual step. I'm going to ask the officer 5 questions. I think the answers are going to be fairly succinct. It's not intended to inhibit your debate, but rather to help it. And it also, from the point of view of members of the public, I think it will be clarify some of the situation. So I've got 5 quick questions to ask Mr. Johnson. And the first one is, what weight is given to the existing local plan, which runs to 2026?
So in terms of the current local plan, obviously we have the tilted balance that's been mentioned in the MPPF and paragraph 11, but where the current core strategy is in general conformity with the MPPF, then you can give that significant weight.
Thank you. And my second one is, does the 5-year housing supply or the shortfall of override all other material considerations?
No, Chairman. I think it's set out in paragraph 20 in the report on page 24 that sort of sets out the requirement there. Paragraph 11 obviously indicates that there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development. It then goes on to set out what that means for decision taking, and it says that where there are no relevant development plan policies, or the policies which are most important for determining applications are out of date, as is the case in our case, then permission should be granted unless, and these are the 2 points, that the application of the policies in the National Planning Policy Framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provide a clear reason for refusal. So that would be sites of special scientific impact, things like that. And then finally, the other part of that is, there are any other adverse impacts of doing so would significantly or demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed again against the wider policies in the National Planning Policy Framework. So members have to take into account all the other policies in the MPPF, and if there is significant harm in the balance, then you could refuse an application quite reasonably.
Thank you. And that leads me nicely on to my third question. Do the adverse effects mentioned in paragraph 11 include the impact on existing communities and residents?
So yes, yes, it does. As with any application where members wish to refuse an application, there has to be a justification and evidence to justify that refusal. In terms of the council's current position, the way we mitigate the impacts on education and primary care trust is through CILs, Community Infrastructure Levy. So for every house that's built, there has to be a contribution paid, which the council then takes in, and that can be used then to provide infrastructure throughout Rutland. And officers separate to the planning application process are regularly in discussions with groups like the Care Commissioning Group and the education team in terms of what applications are coming forward, what developments may come forward, so that they can plan to meet the needs.
Thank you. My fourth question again follows on from that. Does increasing pressure on infrastructure, health, education, highways warrant refusal?
Again, Chairman, it can do so. It then comes down to the evidence and the justification for that. If you were to refuse an application on those grounds, you need to have evidence to back it up. It's no good just saying that's a fact. There has to be some evidence to back it.
And my final question before I open it to general debate, does the overall impact on the county, both physical and social, especially its cumulative effect, count against an application?
So again, I suppose slightly more tricky, this one. Cumulative impacts are a material consideration. But again, there needs to be the evidence that there is that cumulative impact. So there's been a lot of debate about highways for and other developments in and around the area. And I'm sure our, highways colleagues will comment on that. And, we assess those cumulative impacts and then guide you. But yes, it can be a reason.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Johnson. I hope members that was helpful, and I hope members of the public, because certainly in briefing, there were questions that I wasn't myself clear on. So members, Councillor Oxley.
Well, it's one question on the back of that, actually, Mr. Chairman. What is the cumulative effect of applications which have been passed but are actually not live as yet? Because I know a lot of people are concerned about applications have been put in and passed, quite large developments, and there is no work being undertaken, so they can't actually be put into the housing mix.
Mr. Johnson, if we can close that.
Chairman, through you. So where planning permission has been granted for a development, it would then be a material planning consideration in anything else. So a lot of time we would, for instance, the developments in Ketton that we know there have been several recently in and around that area. We have asked for developers to look at the cumulative impact on junctions. So a developer, the first developer that came in, will have provided evidence for their scheme, and then subsequent developers that have come in, we've asked them to look at the other schemes that are on hand or that have been approved.
Ross, was this a question? Or whether
you're presuming that I'm going to go off on another diatribe, Mr. Chairman. Heaven forbid. No, serious one again. Could the officer sort of give an example how monies from SIL have benefited the medical facilities in Oakham?
Chairman, I can't off the top of my head, because it's not something that I'm involved in directly. I can't give you a direct example. What I can tell you is that I've had only, was this month or last month? I think it was this month. We were having a meeting with the care commissioning group, and what I've done for them is send them a list of all of the current on hand and potential developments that are coming in, so that they can plan for the needs of these developments, and also put them in contact with our policy manager so that they can discuss accessing the SIL contributions that we take on in. So we are having active discussions about those issues.
Mr. Chairman, I was getting really excited then when our officer sort of said he got news. I thought he'd managed to see a doctor.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. Gentlemen, members, the debate now opening. I saw Councillor Paul Brown, then Councillor Oxley.
I'm getting rather confused about our allocation for the 5-year period. We're told it's 3.4. We had a representation from the Parish Council from Braunston who challenged those figures. It is my understanding that we're obliged to upgrade our figures every year, not later than the 31st of March. We haven't seen a change in this presentation, and I think it's a very important point. And I think we ought to know exactly what our position is now, as should have been revolved and decided by the 31st of March, because we had a lot of applications in that period of time in the last year.
Chairman, I think the date that our report was updated was September 2021. We're in the process, or policy team are in the process of currently reviewing all of our approvals so that they can calculate the current 5-year housing land supply issue. The current position is based on the data that we had, which is 3.5 years. That is the relevant figure that members should be using today.
But that is for September last year. Was the last time that was looked at.
And like I say, that is the data that we should hold. I have to say that anecdotally, I think our policy team have been looking at it in the background. I don't think that figure is going to get significantly better, but they are looking at it at the moment.
I'm sorry, but I find it really difficult that when it should have been done by the 31st of March, that this committee doesn't have that figure before us now, because I think it's exceedingly relevant to the considerations that are made here tonight.
Just through you, Chair. I don't think they have to do it by the 31st of March. They have to do it annually, and they did it in September 2021. So it has to be done within a 12-month period. And as I say, anecdotally as well, I've been speaking to the planning officer manager, and he said that figure, obviously, because it's a continuum that they check the housing supply. It's something that goes on in the background as a continuum, and it doesn't look that will in any way increase or be a betterment on that figure when the figures are actually released again within that 12-month period.
On this point, yep, Councillor Cross.
Not often I take issue with our legal. However, in the report we have before us, it stated that we would have the up-to-date figures by the end of March, and they are not here. And I agree with my learned councillor along the table there that really we should have what we were supposed to have or promised in the report.
I don't know if you want to come back on that one, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah. Can you go me to the paragraph where it's 18?
Just through the chair again, I've been looking at the information on our website, and it definitely was September 2021. And I know that, I mean, obviously I know the legislation around the SHLA.
It says this will be updated again, commencing at the end of March.
Yeah, it is, because it's on a 12-month. Yes.
It says commencing, and
Yeah.
we have started that process.
Yes, you
but
have.
It won't be released and published until towards September.
They only have to do it every 12 months. So if we've done it in September 21, which we've published, we have to do it again by September 2022. But as I say, it is a continuum. So your planning policy manager is continually looking at data, looking at that. And as I say, anecdotally, I was in a meeting with him myself, and he did say that isn't likely to increase.
Mr. Chairman, I cannot argue with a lady. However,
you can argue with the chair.
However, I could make a suggestion that we councillors require those figures PDQ, regardless of what is stated by central government, with a please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. I think we can move on from this. I think it is perfectly clear that several members are not happy with the quality and the expediency of the numbers that have been provided. I think that is a reasonable summary. Councillor Oxley, you've been patient.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, coming back to the planning application. I remember very well when we were asked to give our thoughts on the application for the field across the road from this site, and the reasons which we gave for those members who were minded to refuse it are pretty much the same as the reasons for this particular application. Given the issue there is with, and it's not that much larger, it's about the same size, pretty much the same number of houses. I can't remember off the top of my head how many. 60. Oh, there are more on this site. Okay, well, that gives him more emphasis on our concerns. I had very real concerns about flooding from the fields. I often say that no matter what you try, you can't beat a green field for soaking up rain. Concrete and tarmac doesn't have the same absorbent qualities, unfortunately. So I have concerns about flooding. I have concerns about, very real concerns about the use of the road into Oakham, where it joins the Cold Overton Road, is already, it is a bottleneck. And people will be trying to get across there to get into Lidl and Aldi, or across the railway to Tesco's. So the road has an existing problem with cars. I remember when the bridge at Sounding Bridge was shut, a lot of people were using this road to get into Oakham, and it was very difficult. And that was, you know, that wasn't with the additional traffic there may very well be from this development. So I have problems with flooding, I have problems with traffic. And whilst I take on board the fact that people who have got a lot of experience have done very detailed tests on the traffic, I have concerns about the fact that the tests were done apparently during lockdown. I'm not sure if that's going to have the same effect as normal day-to-day traffic. I was also surprised to hear that the Oakham neighbourhood plan, which is going to referendum, doesn't have any sites allocated in it. Is that the case? Yeah. I mean, is that something which, what's the point of that, if I may say?
Just one site.
So they don't have to allocate sites. Okay.
Just one site, and it was for 6-7 hours.
Councillor Mansfield,
sorry,
I'll bring you in a moment. Yeah.
Sorry. So, so it's going to referendum. When it finally goes to referendum, it won't actually have any land allocated in it to housing. So they'll be relying on the Rutland local plan for housing in Oakham, which strikes me as a little bit short-sighted on the part of the people who are putting together the plan, but that's not my place to say. So, and the large number of people who are concerned with the application, and I would suggest that they can't all be able to see into the site from their house, because it's really the people whose houses run up the side of the field who's going to have the maximum impact. The rest of them are going to be seeing the impact of it from driving or trying to drive down the road into town, or walk down the road into town, or get to and that's the reason why people are here tonight. It's more to do with the overall impact of this part of the town. And Oakham has got very distinct areas as far as how you can get in and out of easily. Around the bypass, for example, it's a lot easier to get into the town from the land on that side of the bypass than it is from this side, because of the natural obstructions in your way. You've got the railway crossing, and you've got the narrowness of the road. You've got cars parked on the road because there's no off-street parking for a lot of the houses close to the town. And all these arguments were made against the previous application for the field across the road. And I felt that they were well argued, but we were convinced, or we were not allowed really to say otherwise than to approve it, as I remember it. So we are between a rock and a hard place. We are between a rock and a hard place. And the presentations made by, I thought the presentation Braunston Parish Council was very good. Concerns about the traffic. I mean, Braunston, William, you know very well as the member for Braunston. The 275 houses not included in 3.5-year housing supply. But again, I think this goes back to the point I made about if they're live, rather than if they're sitting waiting quietly for someone to come along start them. So there is a difference. I think that's the point I was trying to make. But so I have problems with flooding properties. I have problems with the traffic. And I think those are the two main reasons why I'm going to have problems with this, once again, with this application tonight. I'll wait and hear what the officers have to say. If it was in a different part of town, it would be different. But I think it's just where it is geographically. I've got a real problem with it. So I'll wait to hear what everybody else has to say, but that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Oxley.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson suggested the highways officer might like to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously RPS has done a full transport assessment. The transport assessment was reviewed by AECOM, our consultants. They raised a number of concerns, I suppose you could say. So RPS have provided a subsequent report addressing pretty much all of those comments. And the technical assessment is showing that there is, they've pretty much addressed every comment that AECOM had raised. So for that reason, the Highway Authority has to, raise no objection, subject to conditions which the application or the recommendation has numerous conditions in it to ensure that the development is safe. Okay, and then on the drainage side, as has been already inferred by others, the runoff from the site is restricted to greenfield rate. It's actually slightly less. They have to do, there's quite a lengthy condition asking for much more detailed work to be done rather than just the flood risk assessment. The flood risk assessment is quite high level. So they will have to do a very detailed design and further assessments of the ditches and any watercourse that they're going to join into before it will be signed off at reserve matter stage.
May I
Councillor, yes.
Yeah, it's just a question really with regards to the short, medium and long term outlook of those particular flood defences, if you like. So in 5, 10, 15 years time, what guarantees will there be that they're still working as efficiently then as they will be when they're first built? Because I mean, culverts get blocked. So will there be a long-term plan to ensure that they are working as efficiently in 20 years time as they are the day that they were first laid?
Thank you. Other members? Councillor Clark. Sorry, come back, sorry.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So yes, there's going to be a maintenance maintenance schedule that needs to be submitted showing how all the different features will be maintained and who by, etc., and what public body or whether it will be a management company. So that will all come forward in the reserve matters.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Cross.
I'm up against a lady again. AECOM. What does it stand for?
I don't know, actually.
No, well, that doesn't really matter. However, I presume that they have based their research on the figures provided by RCC.
All right. Yes, so they questioned some of the figures and RPC came back and it had, as I say, explained how they'd found their figures. They did further, AECOM did further checks against some other model data that they had and said actually it was similar. They did use some census data to determine how people were going to be travelling, what directions, etc. And that was given I think it was a 9% uplift or something, to bring it to today's level of traffic. There was also another uplift added for the surveys which were taken obviously during COVID time. They did request sort of traffic data from Rutland, but we didn't hold any information at that time for sort of pre-COVID traffic. So there was no way of checking against pre-COVID levels.
Look, I'm not actually worried about the deficiency that we have with our figures, although it is a very serious when we are considering this development. And the other question would be, did AECOM take into account that the crossings will be shut for upwards of 40 minutes in every hour?
Yes, I believe they did take that into account.
Now, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. That really worries me when we are depending upon a management company that says everything will be all right, even though the railway crossings will be shut for twice as long as they are now, and we are backed up to I don't know where. So unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, I am unable to put any weight against Mr. AECOM, whoever he or she may be. Thank you.
Other members? Councillor Dale.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hodgett in his presentation said that there was low surface flood risk. Was that for the site or was that for the area?
Well, the site itself is based on a low flood risk. The slide that I showed you with the flood map on it that had been circulated to members was a flood map that showed potential flooding after heavy rain. It wasn't a flood map that showed risk of flooding from a watercourse. There is a separate plan showing that within the flood risk assessment, which doesn't show that blue line across the lower side of the site because there's no watercourse there. That was only for flooding on the site based on rainwater running down the slope in a southerly direction. But as members accepted on the site on the other side where there were similar issues, the flood risk assessment and the surface water drainage system can actually improve matters where on the site on the south of Braunston Road, the residents in those bungalows were complaining that surface water ran off the field into their properties. And it was demonstrated from the flood risk assessment that you can intercept that water and discharge it at a low rate into the watercourse, which actually stops water flooding into the properties. And there's no reason why the same wouldn't happen on this side of the road because it's exactly the same principle.
Could you just indicate on the plan at the north, the lagoon or pond or whatever we call it, where does that drain away? Does that go along the bottom in front of those houses and then into the stream? Yeah.
Discharge into this stream here.
Yeah, how does it discharge into it? Does it go across the land that's being kept or?
It goes across the applicant's owned land that's not within the application site, which is this section here.
Yeah, no, I know it isn't, but I just wondered where it went. It doesn't actually go down and across, it goes across diagonally.
Yeah, it's as clear as you can see. That's only a strategic plan at this stage. We'll be more detailed.
Yeah.
And then the one at the southern end here next to Braunston Road will discharge out onto the ditch on Braunston Road in the same fashion that one goes into the watercourse on that side.
Thank you.
Other members? I don't know whether I'm taking Councillor Ball or Councillor Gordon Brown. Councillor Ball.
Okay, then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I have a number of issues
with this application. First of all, our officers are in a difficult position, so there's absolutely no criticism implied. And I do acknowledge the sincerity of Mr. Weir and Mr. Gore. I'm sure if planning permission is granted, they will carry out exactly what they've said. So I have no issues with their integrity. But as people will know me, particularly in matters of planning, I come from a background where rules and regulations are for the guidance of wise men and women, and guidance is where I want to stress. Those rules and regulations are for guidance, not for blind adherence. We talk about the lack, or we talk about a 5-year housing supply. Now, again, with the greatest respect and somewhat of a background in figures, the formula, the calculation is flawed. We know from the past applications, both at Ketton, both at Spinney Hill, elsewhere in Langham and all over, what there will be, and the calculation is partly due to the year's calculation, it's partly due to outside factors. When you have COVID and people can't move because we're all in lockdown, they slow. When there's a government incentive for young people to buy the first starter homes, etc., they speed up. And what I predict, not necessarily in September, but after that, there is going to be a rapid change in our 5-year supply. For example, we have an application here this evening of 100. We could have, we don't have, we could have another 2 applications also of 100. And yet, because of the formula, because of the flawed calculation, our figures will move very slowly. So I do not believe 3.5 years is correct in normal time. Now, we don't have a local plan, that's right, but we do have a local plan that is going forward historically to 2026, and we have to take some weight of that. But you don't need a local plan. It's not part of the requisite in planning matters. In fact, there are many councils who don't have a local plan. North Somerset, where I came many years ago, have not had a local plan, as I remember, for over, at this present moment, for over 11 years or more. And yet they pass on a regular basis planning applications such as these before us, or they turn them down. So I come back then to the basics. This application is outside permitted development. We have some historical concern with this site, and I am not convinced, unfortunately, that the number reduction is going to address the concerns on the water flows and the flooding and whatever. And I think more importantly is the infrastructure issues that we have in Oakham, and they are severe. We have concerns on health, we have concerns on education, what we're going to do with leisure and sport. We have concerns with the traffic flow, and of course, as we've heard, with the railway. So all in all, members, I'm afraid I cannot support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Councillor Gordon Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments. First of all, there's some questions I'd like to pose to officers. I'll just go back to paragraph 18, Just for Councillor Cross's benefit, because I'm sure he's read it, but his memory is getting poor in his age. An outline permission, and for Councillor Bull, an outline permission does not add to the supply until possibly year 3 or reserved matters are approved. Now, we have had a number of approvals. You mentioned, I think, Ketton. Some people have mentioned Ketton tonight. The sites in Ketton that were approved last year, that is the Chitterfield and the Crescent, amounting to some 75 homes. We are nowhere near getting to the detail on that. My understanding is that we're still working on the Section 106 agreement, which means that we haven't actually approved the application formally. And that's now what, 6 months longer? So I think we've got to be careful how we look at it. And I understand Councillor Bull's comments that the system may be flawed, but sadly it's a system that we live with. And we must remember that when it comes to planning appeals, which I'm sure we'll see very shortly. So that's the issue on timing. I think the next, and also of course that we only have a 5-year supply, problem of 5-year supply, of course, because the local plan was voted down by this very council. And that was rather sad, because I think we had a very good local plan. And this site would not have appeared in that local plan accordingly. And so we find ourselves, to some extent, at our own fault for making that decision at that time in relation to this site. The questions I'd like to ask, and particularly the highways engineer, I'm sorry, I keep asking you questions. It was mentioned earlier tonight about severe impact. And I'd like to understand, and I'd like everyone to understand, what does severe impact of traffic on a road mean? How much of capacity has to be used up before it's severe? In other words, is it 50% of capacity, 75% capacity, or is it, I've heard, 110% of capacity or even higher?
Through you, Chair. Right. So junctions are assessed and there's a value that's applied to them when you've added all the committed development, the proposed development, and that's on top of obviously the traffic counts, etc., that are carried out. So the junctions are identified as requiring assessment if it has more than 30 vehicles, 32-way vehicles added to it. So that identifies the junctions. Every arm on every junction is assessed to see whether it hits this. You can't really go over like 100% capacity because it's not theoretically feasible, but so they have this figure called RFC, which is a value of 1, and once you get to the value of 1, that's when you've theoretically reached the capacity of that junction on that particular arm. The assessment that they've done, and they've added uplifts, etc., that has determined that basically there is capacity. I'm not local to Oakham. You know, I'm a temporary agency worker filling in for somebody on maternity leave. So I won't know the area as well as you all obviously do. So that will determine whether a junction has got physical capacity in it still, and what the development will take that up to. So that's how it's all assessed within the transport assessment. The interesting thing is that I know planning inspectorates don't consider capacity an issue. It's more highway safety. If there's a highway safety issue, then that is a concern. But capacity, I've known many developments gone to appeal over the years, and they've been allowed because they don't consider capacity an issue. If you've got to sit there waiting for another minute in the morning, then you know that it's not that it's unsafe. They would be more concerned about if it's unsafe. If the assessment determines that a junction is at capacity, then obviously the developer has to put forward an improvement scheme to see how they can improve that capacity. But that wasn't the case here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I pick up now, Chair, on the issue of the drainage of potential flooding? And I'd just like to clarify, there's been a number of numbers thrown about tonight, and just to be clear, 4.3 litres per second is the total normal rainfall or amount of water flowing off the site in its current form, if I'm not mistaken. It's slightly higher than that, I believe, is what the indication is. But there are two figures in the report. One is 2.4 litres per second for the northern end, and the other is 5.4 litres for the southern end. Is it the case that those two numbers put together based on the calculations sum to 4.3 average? Is that the case?
No, the site will be limited to 4.3 litres. I think it's per hectare, it should be. So it's, yeah. On some sites where we've been concerned, we will limit a site to greenfield runoff rate for the whole site. And then others where there is capacity or perceived capacity within the ditches or wherever the outfall's going, it would be on whatever the greenfield rate is for that particular site, and it would be per hectare, or we can restrict it to the whole site. If it's say it's 2 hectares, we could say it could be restricted to 4.3 for the whole site.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So in other words, on the southern end of the site, it'll be 5.4 litres per second per hectare for that part, which has been drained into that part of the site.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that point. Thank you, Chair. That's all I've got to ask tonight. Thank you.
Councillor McCartney.
Thanks, Chair. Julie, sorry, one more question. Do you have the figure to hand for how close to capacity the junction is of West Road and Cold Overton Road?
I don't, but I can find it for you and then come back to you.
Thank you. Okay. In the meantime, I'll come on to some other things. So the public deputations that we've had have made much of asking us to choose our developments in the county, which is not something we're privileged to be able to do as an authority. We can't make developers come forward with sites. And so I think we all here have supreme sympathy for the officers in having to choose where we can develop. We do have other sites in the pipeline which we might prefer, and so I have a list of 3 concerns here I have about this particular site, which I'll put to the committee and let what we can make up our own minds, I suppose. The first is mitigating strategic scale mitigation for this is under the Sheila report, December 19, strategic scale mitigation on the highways network, which relates back to my question for the junction of West Road and Cold Overton Road. For me, the west side of town isn't sustainable. We've got, as I've said, locations for development elsewhere coming forward in the town, which I think would perhaps might look more favourably on. For me, this is not one that I think I can support. So I don't think that if the developer was asked whether they could mitigate strategic scale highways issues, that feeds back for me to that junction of West Road and Cold Overton Road, where I farm in Braunston and I live in Barrow, and I use that road several times a day, every day, and I know at 8:30 in the morning what it is like trying to get from West Road onto Cold Overton Road to then try to get across the main crossing into town. And I know the wait times there, they are painful. I don't think that can be mitigated. If that could have been mitigated, it's something this authority would have done by now. And having spoken to previous chief exec about this, you know, that main crossing in Oakham is a black hole for us, and I don't know, you know, I don't know what we can do about it. I'm not sure we can do anything about it. If we can't, then neither can the developer. My second concern, and I should have argued more stringently about this at the last application to the south of Braunston Road, is regarding development next to high voltage lines. It's not something I'm comfortable with. I did mention in the last committee meeting about this when we had the site south of Braunston Road come before us, several scientific studies which mention the effects of electromagnetic fields on human health, our circadian rhythms, and also the effect of several well-known drugs used in cancer treatments and childhood leukemia. I don't like the idea of the plan that we've got for development here. For me, it would need to be further away from the high voltage lines. But for it to be further away from the high voltage lines, it then comes further up the hill, which makes it less acceptable for us in terms of landscaping. So I think we're stuck between a rock and a hard place there. It's a difficult site to try and position housing on. If we were going to put acceptable housing on it, it would be this bottom left-hand corner here and the top left-hand corner of the proposed housing on there. But that would leave two pockets of awkward-looking housing, which I don't really think would fit well with this. At the same time, I have a lot of sympathy for the report that says that the edge of Oakham is a rather stark line. And I know from driving down from Braunston into Oakham several times a day, that is a stark line and it would benefit from being softened. But it's a stark line because it's got a high voltage line running down it. And we can't soften the high voltage line. I don't think National Grid are going to want to put a curve in it, or Western Power rather, are going to want to put a curve in it to allow us to alter the aesthetics of the edge of our town. So that's my second concern. My third concern is surface water. I know the farmer that has tenanted this field years and years and years ago. They don't now. But I've driven around that with them and I know where the waterlogging sites are in that field. And we're building on the wet bits, and those wet bits are going to be people's gardens and driveways, and that might not be a flood risk, which is assessed as being a flood risk on the watercourses. But when we have heavy rainfall, we're on clay here in Rutland. That is going to be a wet field, and we're going to have standing water in people's gardens, driveways. You know, we're paving over much of it as well. So it's, I'm just not comfortable with that. So, Sherry, am I in order? Am I in order proposing a rejection of this based on the surface water issues on the development site?
Chair, can I just speak through you? Because I did want to come in actually, particularly on the highways issues, obviously, which your highway officer has said to you, that it has to be severe. And it isn't just all about capacity, it's saying it is about, I've personally as well been involved in appeals on that particular point. So what you would have to do is you would have to have evidence. So we couldn't support an appeal on the basis of anecdotal things. It would have to be evidence because the bar is so very high, and that's been set. And I take on Councillor Ball's point that it is guidance, but you've also got all the national and planning legislation that looks at that. So that would be a caution purely on a legal basis to members, that when you are looking at things on that basis, that you would have to go, and obviously because you've got a recommendation, the report's actually giving approval of it, it would be from, any appeal somebody would have to go in and support that, because it would be your recommendation that it was severe, and you would have to give that evidence against experts. So that I would, please bear that in mind. On the drainage, again, it's the planning judgment. The bar isn't as high, but again, you've got evidence that has been presented and in the report to say that it is going to have, obviously at the moment it's an outline, so it's all at eye level things, but they're saying actually the flood agency are all saying that it can be mitigated and it will be zero effect. So that's my advice. Obviously, you're within the remit of material planning considerations, which is a helpful. But I just wanted to just really make that aware that my own personal experience on highway safety, it's a very high bar.
And the issue of the high voltage lines.
The high voltage lines, again, I mean, obviously, again, people's health can be a material planning consideration, but it doesn't appear, I mean, that would come under building I would imagine that if there was any issues with that, that would be brought up anyway.
If I can perhaps help on that point, when we dealt with the application on the other side of the road, these are not national grid lines because they're not high enough power. I think they're 130 kV. And Western Power didn't have any objections to the previous application, whether the wires were put underground or kept as they were. And I think what the previous report on the south side of Braunston Road did go into some detail about the health risks of development in proximity to overhead lines, and it concluded that the development on that side would be safe for the type of lines that you've got there. And I would also point out that the existing houses that back onto the lines are probably nearer to than the new build would be. So,
thanks. Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think the existing houses are nearer to them. Unfortunately, we can't do anything about those ones, can we? Which is that, they were built in the late 70s, I think, when we perhaps didn't know as much as we do now. Do we have the figure for the junction, Julie?
Yes, it's coming out at 0.62 out of 1. So it's saying, and that's with the development traffic adding and the proposed development time of 2026.
Thank you. I'm not a highways engineer, and but I'm a scientist, and I think 0.62 out of 1 is probably not severe. I'd suggest that, probably above 0.75 would be deemed as severe in my eyes. So that's probably not going to stand up under appeal, is it? Have any other members got any recommendations or proposals?
Councillor, I'd like to come back on a couple of things. First of all, what Councillor McCartney has just said about the composition of the field, in that it's clay, and clay is not a good absorber of water, which may be why there is flooding. And I also want to make a point about the transport. I mean, I think we're between a rock and a hard place again with regards to national figures, because if you're up against London, for example, where you've got thousands of cars trying to get through a very narrow gap, compared to the Cold Overton Road coming onto the Braunston Road. And I think that's, so it is difficult for us to be able to get things into perspective because of that reason, because as I say, the figures are done on average across the whole country. And urban areas are going to be different to rural areas, I would suggest. I mean, I may be wrong on that. The highways officer may be able to advise me on that. But I think that's the problem we have, that we're being asked to compare, what we've got here and what we've got in London. And that makes it very difficult for us to actually come up with an accurate number.
Quickly.
Yeah, just on the drainage, Chairman, as that slide says, that there is a low risk indicative drainage pathway across the site, which is the one that we referred to earlier from surface water runoff from flooding. But the flood risk assessment does acknowledge that the site is underlain by clay and wouldn't be suitable for drainage by infiltration, which is why they're proposing the 2 balancing ponds, which will store water in times of heavy rain and then discharge it out at the greenfield rate into the watercourses. So the water that wouldn't necessarily stand in people's gardens, it will be taken away and stand in those 2 basins before it's allowed to go away at a slower rate. But no, that there wouldn't be any infiltration into the ground because of that issue that it is clay.
Members, I have listened very carefully to what you have to say, and I'm now going to put my own opinion forward. If any other members, before we take a vote, obviously, I'll call you forward. I'm a very local yokel. I was born in Braunston, brought up in Braunston, and am fortunate enough to be living in Braunston again. So I know this area extremely well. I've never had such a reaction to planning as I've had to this. People who I've known all my life, people who are simply names to me, and I would like publicly to thank you for the way in which you have contacted me and put your opinions, often very carefully thought out opinions, forward. This is not just a case of NIMBYism, in my opinion. Looking at the report itself, the executive summary, a landscape visual impact assessment has been independently verified and demonstrates that the impact of the development would not have a harmful effect on the west side of the town. Then look at page 25 of this report, and you will find that it was originally read, in other words, it was definitely against it. The independent assessor, and I found it very worrying, then said, as a result of the development to the south of the road, he has now revised that downwards to amber. I think that is a terrifying precedent, personally. And I would say, why would people want to buy a house here and in Rutland? They would want to buy it because they would think they were coming next to a traditional market town, easily accessible. They would think that they could walk out into pleasant countryside. And we have seen through COVID the effect that well-being, on the well-being of the population, has the ability to people to go out and enjoy the countryside. The bigger a town gets, the fewer opportunities, the more difficult that is. And I don't mean you shan't have development anywhere. You have to have some, and it may well be in market towns, but I don't think where it is and the scale of it should be imposed on it in the way that perhaps it is. Expert opinion, members. When Tesco was first put forward, and I mentioned this specifically, and other members have already said about urban solutions to rural problems, we had an independent assessment and it was graded 1 to 10. I didn't understand what 1 to 10 meant, and I was told that 10 meant gridlock, but the worst, it would be an 8. So people wouldn't wait more than a quarter of an hour. Well, imagine you come into Oakham shopping and you wait a quarter of an hour before you can move. Well, that wasn't an Oakham solution. And equally, on the actual countryside, our predecessors in the 60s had this new thing called herbicide, which the experts thought was absolutely marvelous. It would save money on verge cutting and goodness knows what else. I can tell you that I biked from Braunston to Oakham and back for many years when at school and many years ago. The verges were full of rest harrow, of cinquefoil, of meadowsweet. There were insects, there were birds. Look at it now. The cowslips, I'm pleased to say, aren't just coming back. I didn't notice there's a clump there. But basically, the expert opinion actually made the quality of the experience for people living here worse. I am skeptical, other members have already said, skeptical about some of the algorithms that are used to come up with these solutions. And so I find myself, unfortunately, the questions that I asked of Mr. Johnson right at the beginning have assured me that I exercise my judgment. So I'm not only speaking as a ward member representing the views of the people who elected me, but they elected me to exercise my judgment as well. And my judgment in this case is that if you look at the implications of this, the benefits do not outweigh the effect it's going to have on the existing people. And indeed, I think the very people who want to come to buy a house may well find that they have already lost their dream. And I think we owe it to not only the present community, but particularly, I can't put the clock back. My grandsons can't bike from Oakham to Braunston, too dangerous for a start. But I cannot approve of something that is going to be detrimental, not only to the people who live here at the moment, but to future generations. I really cannot support this application, but I look forward to hearing a proposal in due course, and we will then vote. And what I would say, we need cool heads as well as warm hearts. There's no doubting the latter, but the former. And Mr. Johnson rightly said, we need evidence if we are to refuse this or any other application. I will continue to look at each application on its merits, and that is true of all Oakham applications. But on this one, I really cannot support it. But members, back to you. And if you have any further comments, I'll hear them. Councillor Oxley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to make a quick point about the fact that there is planning permission given to the field across the road. But I think that actually adds to the weight for us to refuse this, because it actually will mean that there are more, there's going to be more pressure put onto the roads and the infrastructure. So I can't see how someone could say, well, actually, because there's permission in the field across the road, so we should also give permission to this particular application. And I feel that that alone is a good reason for us to refuse it, irrespective of the fact there's clay under there, so the water's going to run off, and the problems with the highways.
Other members? Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've stated much of what I would be going to say, but I'll remind people that under the previous local plan, it is considered that the landscape constraint is significant and the development of the site would have a detrimental impact on the setting of Oakham along the western edge of the town. It is accepted that the existing built form along the edge is stark, but this does not justify extending this form of development further west into open countryside. He then slightly goes back on what he was saying, and I paraphrase. The illustrative layout on the master plan shows that an appropriate new western edge to Oakham can be created in this location without resulting in overriding significant adverse landscape and visual effect. That, Mr. Chairman, is for him to think. But we who live and work in Rutland take a different view. But bear in mind, if we just simply took his advice that in order to beautify the entrance to Oakham, we have to build over 100 houses, that's as maybe. But what is the impact to our community for such a development. I've written here, and I quote our highways officer, safety is paramount on the roads. And people, when they're held up at that railway, do get rather tested. And if it increases, the testing will result, I'm afraid, in accidents. I put in capital letters, practicalities. Now, we all hear advice from experts. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, as far as ACOM goes, and I've already told you, we can take no weight from those pieces of advice. Some of these people giving the advice have not lived in Locum. They have not seen the results of very heavy rainfall within our streets. The effects upon our medical facilities, our education, is our, as councillors, our responsibility to take care of. And I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, I cannot support this development. As far as the local plan goes, Rutland has always exceeded our quota, and there is absolutely no reason to think otherwise. And I'm afraid I will rest my case there, and so saying again, I cannot support it.
Thank you. Members, we need to go to an extension. May I have a proposal, please? Thank you, Councillor Gordon Brown, seconded Councillor McCartney. Those in favour, please. So that's a quarter of an hour at the moment. If necessary, I'll take another quarter of an hour and that's it. Do I have a proposal?
To the officer, who carried out the drainage assessment? Was it the applicant on? It was, wasn't it? It was their own assessment.
Are you talking about the flood drainage strategy? Yes, it was their own consultant.
I thought it was.
Any other members, or do we have a proposal? Councillor Oxley.
Well, I thought Abby actually did have a proposal earlier with regards to to refuse, you were saying. Well, we'd like to propose that we refuse the application based on drainage and the highways considerations, saturation of the roads. I know that we don't have the evidence. I know we don't have the evidence, but and it's anecdotal. But we've had 250 people who live in the area who have put forward strong arguments against this because they know what it's going to be like to live there. And as I say, there is an application directly opposite. So, I mean, I'll go with what the officers say, but
I'm going to look for a seconder, and then I'm going to transfer across, and then I'm going to go into the reasons for. Was that what you kept going on?
I was just going to come in to the reasons for and just a bit of a warning for members, if I can. Clearly, members, you're entitled to make whatever decision you wish to tonight, and it's not my job to try and persuade you otherwise. All I would say is that you need to be aware of a number of points. One is, obviously, we've talked about the evidence, and if we as officers are trying to defend an appeal, that is what we're going to need to give to a planning inspector and be able to argue. Without that evidence, there is a significant risk of an award of costs against the council and the appeal being allowed. And I don't say that to sort of try and influence you, but it's a point that you need to be aware of. The other point that you need to be aware of is in terms of a position around the number of appeals that we have. The government does an assessment of the quality of planning decisions that we make on major applications. Where we have more than 10% of major applications overturned at appeal, we can be called in as a standards authority. At that point, the applicants can apply straight to the Secretary of State for decisions, and it's taken out of the council's hands. At the moment, we're around 2%, so we're well under that. But the point that I make out is that we're having lots of these applications at the moment come in. We've had a number of in Ketton. We've got more still to come around Oakham. That current position, it would not take a lot for it to change. In fact, I think it's between 4 or 8 applications overturned at appeal would put us at risk. So again, that's purely for information. If you are going to refuse this application, then I would just strongly advise that it is on points that we can evidence and argue. And I think the issues, as we've said, around drainage and highways, obviously, a traffic impact assessment has been done. That's been reviewed by professional consultants and by our own highways engineer. The advice there is that there is capacity and that it's not detrimental to highway safety. It will be very difficult to argue that point at appeal. Again, with regards to drainage, our own experts as lead flood authority, Anglian Water and the Environment Agency have all raised no objections to the proposal, and that it can be suitably mitigated. Arguably, the situation can be improved through conditions in order to mitigate some of the existing problems where water's running down that field onto the highway. The other issues around landscape and things like that, as Councillor Cross has said, that there is some subjectivity in that. I would be far more comfortable defending that at a reason for appeal than perhaps the highways and drainage, but it is for members to decide what ultimately you want to do.
Councillor Oxley first, then Councillor Cross.
So just to clarify that point about landscaping, what do you mean by that, Justin? Page 25.
Chairman, through you, just all I'm saying in terms of that is clearly there was an assessment done at one point in time. We've had an expert review it and they have concluded that subject to not building above the 135 contour, it would be acceptable. But that is to some extent a subjective assessment. It's a professional one, but members, anybody walking past there can make their own judgment. That is probably far easier for us to defend and argue at appeal than the more technical arguments surrounding highways and drainage.
May I just quickly come back again, because it's the cumulative effect of both applications, both sides of the road. So we're actually talking about 60 houses on the other side of the road and 100 and how many is it this side? 100, yeah. So it's 160 altogether in this one pinch point together collectively. And I think that's what is creating so many problems with our ability to actually give permission to it. That's without, so we'll have the impact from onto the road from both sides of the road.
Sorry, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I'll ask Julie, but I believe the highways assessment took into account the cumulative impact, but so I can't really add any more. It is what it is.
To be clear, Mr. Johnson, where did you think you could defend reasonably on appeal?
Well, my preference would be to defend grounds on. I'm not encouraging. The recommendation is for approval, but I think we can. I would be more comfortable defending a point on the landscape arguments and the visual impacts of the development, where it is open to interpretation a bit more than the highways and the technical grounds.
I'd written that down as one of my reasons. Thank you. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our planning officer is quite correct in bringing to our notice the pitfalls that may lay ahead. And it is his duty to point those out to us. But it is our duty as councillors to protect the county and protect those people that live within the county and have charged us with such duty. And I believe it is right and proper that at times this council should take a lead to defend itself. And I believe that the people of Rutland would think less of us if we said yes to everything because costs may be awarded against us. But that is not the important part. The importance is that our planning officers are men of quality and have won most of the appeals, and we are proud of them and what they have done. Landscape, to me, is so important. And I'm pleased that our planning officer said it is one of the important factors that we can use. But again, it is time that we took a stand about the dangers of the cumulative effects of all of this planning applications and more people and families moving into the area and the effect upon the current population. Because that is what is important. It is quality of life, Mr. Chairman, as you have already stated. And I'm afraid my position remains firm, and I am delighted to second Councillor Oxley's proposition that we do refuse this application. And we can first and foremost cite landscape. But it is right and proper that we state what we have said tonight, the other impacts, the important impacts upon the community. And I believe if it goes to appeal, the inspector would appreciate our truthfulness and our earnestness in our deliberations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Legal officer, do you want to come in?
No, I just wanted to just really clarify a point, obviously, just before you make the decision that, and I know we all know this, but again, I just feel I want to tell you that when you are making this decision, you're here, obviously, as you know, it's national government guidance that you're looking at, but mainly we've got to only consider, because I know that as members, you're all here, obviously, for the constituents, but when you're on here as this role as a member on the committee, is that you can only consider planning issues. So that's what we're here to deal with, is the planning issues. And then the other issues we can't take into account. So that's what really, I really do want to just put that into focus, that it has to be planning related, why we are refusing. So I know all of the other things are very important, and they are important, but we have to look at it purely on planning. And I think that's what Justin's been trying to convey earlier.
Yeah, I'll bring you in a second, Councillor Oxley. What I've got so far is that one reason for refusal would be the environmental landscape impact. So we'll definitely put that down. Can I ask if the fact that it's outside plan limited development and we are still on the 2026 plan, is that a reason?
I would include that as part of the land.
I was going to say whether it's a separate thing. And the second point I was going to make, bearing in mind evidence-based, and we come back to quality of life, we've got nearly 250 objections coming in various forms, and most of the ones that I've seen were precisely about the impact it was going to have on the current residents' quality of life. And I wondered if that would count as evidence and how far it would be a planning thing, which was the point of my last two questions right at the beginning.
I mean, if you can elaborate and just explain, sorry, in terms of what impacting on them in terms of residential amenity, that sort of.
Yes, I think it's, I would say, more a sense of well-being and quality of life. Yes. And I mean, personally, I'm skeptical as to whether the sill thing would actually meet the shortfall in the provision. And I don't know if that
You see, that's a difficult one because we set our sill, don't we? So we've, as a council, have said, right, well, we want to take sill from you. And what happens is that now, actually, the legislation is now enforced that annually what we have to do as a council, we have to sit with all of the big infrastructure organisations like the Primary Care Trust, with our education colleagues, and then we have to distribute the pot of money that we have, and we as a council are the people who obviously are the owners and the keepers of distributing that. So I think that is a little bit of a difficult one in the fact that we have got quite a high sill level and rate for that infrastructure, which we've all set as people who've sat on that to do that. So that personally for me is a difficult one.
Yeah, I mean, I again, I think it's difficult. You know, we can. It's difficult to argue some of these issues on well-being, quality of life. I mean, I suppose having, you know, built form next to them, residential amenity, you know, some of that loss of the wider outlook again rolls in with that landscaping. I think it's difficult again to argue the residential amenity in terms of overlooking and loss of privacy because of the separation distances between the two sites.
Mr. Chairman, I take our officers' points on board.
Sorry,
but nobody.
Councillor Cross, no. It is simply the time. I'm not cutting you off in your pride. May I have a second? I may remind you that this is the last one we can do. I've duly got Councillor McCartney, Councillor Paul Brown. Those in favour, please. Thank you. But Councillor Cross, continue.
But nobody really is complaining about overlooking a NIMBYism. They are just so concerned about having a pleasant, practical life. They're not against proper extended housing where it is appropriate. And I think we mustn't try to muddy the waters by going down that avenue. We've really got to sort of concentrate on the medical side and the schooling side, because it has been demonstrated tonight that SIL monies in the past have done nothing to improve our facilities. And unfortunately, in my view, Mr. Chairman, such facilities should be in place before any development takes place. The crossings should be addressed before such development takes place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. Councillor Oxley.
I just wanted to say it's a development in open countryside. It's not just outside the plan limits development, it's open countryside, and I think that should also be taken.
I think the officer was going to put that in the impact. So we're now saying, I want to get this absolutely clear, we've got that, and we've got the quality of life, which includes the infrastructure service in particular. Personally, listening to what the officer has said, I think that would be sufficient, rather than going down the two where we've been told very clearly that the professional advice, however much local opinion may be against it, is not going to help us at all. In other words, both the traffic and the flooding, although we're very well aware of them, may not stand up to rigorous examination. Councillor Councillor Paul Brown, I saw your hand and missed you.
There's just one other possible one. Paragraph 49 of the NPPF speaks that some weight, not overriding weight, should be given to an emerging neighbourhood plan. This is very close. It's going out to referendum. Could that be cited?
If you believe that there are relevant policies in that neighbourhood plan, then yes, that can be given.
Well, surely
weight.
100 houses that are going to be built in open countryside is really undermining the spatial strategy that may come within that policy.
The problem is paragraph 11D is still engaged because we don't have a 5-year supply and the open neighbourhood plan doesn't allocate any land. That's the clear policy from our policy manager on that particular issue. I mean, you know, this issue was confused at Langham on the previous meeting as to the weight that you can lend to it. And you know that you're going to reconsider that. The weight to be given to the open neighbourhood plan is that it doesn't allocate any sites. Therefore, the local plan policy remains, which is out of date. So paragraph 11D still is engaged.
Chairman, if you would just bear with me. This is Welford-on-Avon, Stratford District Council. The local plan was at examination. The council could not demonstrate a 5-year land supply of housing. However, the inspector determined that the proposal should be refused chiefly on the basis that it would have had an adverse impact on the character of that part of the district, and it would have a result in the loss of a significant quantity of best and most versatile agricultural land. And being a farmer, I would thoroughly support that.
Mr. Johnson.
Chairman, I was just going to say, and I think that point about having the impact on the character of the neighbourhood all again fits into that landscaping argument that I'm, you know,
the point was they hadn't got a 5-year.
And on that point, not having a 5-year, having or not having a 5-year housing land supply does not mean that every application will be approved. And I don't want any members to think that. But if you are going to refuse an application, you need to have good grounds to do them. And they have to be weighed and against the policies in the National Planning Policy Framework. And so I think around the landscape and the impact on the outside the plan limit of development and the open countryside character of the neighbourhood, I'm happy, Chairman, that we can do. And obviously I take on board the points and the other reason for refusal about the impact in terms of well-being and infrastructure and things like that I'm not as comfortable with, but I appreciate members want that to be included as a reason for refusal, and we will do so.
Members, I've seen various people indicating, but unless it is something crucial and new, I really do think we need to move to a vote and move to a resolution. I personally, from the chair, I would say that those two fairly complex reasons which the officer has just outlined would be sufficient to warrant refusal and be defensible at appeal. As I say, I do see members wishing to indicate, but please, I think we have debated long and hard, but very briefly.
Well, I was going to say, as the person who proposed the refusal, I would call for the vote to be taken, but I think we need to clarify exactly what we are going to be voting on before we vote.
Thank you. Yes. And so,
Chairman, so at the moment I have two substantive reasons for refusal. One which relates to the landscape impact of the development, the fact that it's outside of the planned limits of development and in the open countryside, and the impact that development would have on the general character of that part of the area of Oakham. And then the second, it relates to the impact on residential well-being and quality of life, in particular, due to the lack of infrastructure around health, leisure and schools.
Thank you. Having said that, it has been proposed and seconded that it is refused. All those in favour, please.
Make that 9, Chair.
And against?
2.
And that is correct, isn't it? Yes, that is duly refused by 9 votes to 2. Thank you, members of the public, for your attendance. And I will give a brief interval, very brief interval, so that you may disappear. Thank you.
Excuse me, I've got my lady and 3 little girls.
I know your propensity for the female. Yes, of course, Mr. Members, we're certainly not going to have time to discuss the Moorcote one. I've just had a quick word with Mr. Johnson. We might well manage to bring it to the 28th, but we do need, I think, possibly to do another 6 o'clock start. I hope that's not too inconvenient.
The only problem with that special meeting is not everybody will be there, will there? It's only the members who will actually.
That's right. It will only be 9 of us for that. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Before you close.
Yes.
To help officers, when we are looking at planning applications, particularly in Oakham and perhaps also in Uppingham, where we have this growing density of applications, we do have a problem, and it may not be material, but I do believe, you know full well, we do have a problem with education numbers. If you look at primary, you can say, oh, well, we haven't got a problem because we can bus the children to excellent, we can bus them, but that is not a satisfactory sort of get out of jail card when you've got primary with the mums taking the older children. So I do believe we ought to try and build something together for future defence, and certainly along the lines of health, because you're not going to build a surgery in under what, a couple of years, and so I do struggle with the infrastructure against the rule book, and I do believe we ought to try and develop something to actually support officers, if you like.
Yeah. So if I can come back in, I suppose part of the issue that we've got is it's within our gift. Ultimately, we have members have agreed at council to adopt SIL and set a charge for developers. So all the developer can do is agree to pay that SIL. Once they've done that, then they've done their part, and then it's all back onto us as an authority. Now, I am in discussions as the development manager with the CCG our planning policy team and with the education team within the council to make them aware of where all this development's going so that they can plan for that infrastructure. There is then a process that is in place where they can get the money from SIL to put towards these things. But there is a bit of a chicken and egg. The development comes first because that's what pays for these things. And then that money can be spent through SIL in order to build. And lots of the discussions that we've had at the moment is about extending existing schools and extending existing surgeries.
Councillor, I'm desperately concerned on the meeting closing in time. I'm not going to take either the appeals or the planning enforcement update, but put those on to the 28th.
And just to be clear, Chair, that is including the two applications not considered tonight.
It would, yes, yeah. So that thing, I think it's about 5 to 10. I declare the meeting closed, and thank you for your attendance and thank you for the marathon debate. Okay, thank you.